Keeping your business healthy in today's marketplace can be a challenging and overwhelming task. From the threat of litigation inside and outside your organization and the inefficiencies that can rob your bottom line as a result of unproven marketing programs, the deck can be stacked against you. To get ahead of these challenges and stay ahead of your competition, the Bottled Business Sense Show provides practical business solutions that uniquely emphasize key legal principles, management techniques, and marketing strategies to protect and ensure the longevity of your business. You'll learn how to implement marketing and protection principles equal to those used by today's most successful corporations. Join your hosts Bill Bernard, Rick Moscoso, and Steve Smith for some high-energy discussion that will inspire you to take control of your business so it can prosper in today's consistently challenging business environment.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Bernard. I'm one of your co-hosts. Welcome to another edition of the Bottled Business Sense Show. We're here every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., bringing you the best possible information we can to protect and prosper your business. We market, so to speak, to the business owner, the entrepreneur, even the large businesses out there that want free advice on how to secure your business's future. And we do it, as I said, for free, and we look forward to it every week. And so let me welcome in my other two co-hosts today, and then I'll talk a little bit about our topic. On the other end is Mr. Rick Moscoso and Steve Smith. Gentlemen, how are you this morning?
Hey, good morning, Bill. I'm doing great. Great to be here for another episode with the boys. And Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, and I say ditto to what you just said.
Oh, okay. Well, you can see, folks, we're in agreement already. Should make for an interesting show. We've talked a lot about employment on past shows. We talked about employer-employee relationships. We've done a number of things in that area and how important that topic is. But we want to focus today on the expectations of an employee when he or she comes to look for a job. What is he or she really looking for, and what are they expecting when they enter a business to spend quite a bit of their life there? Let's face it, employees spend, and I was an employee once many years ago. You spend a good fraction of your life there all day and sometimes into the early evening, and so you want it to be an atmosphere that's going to promote growth and health and of not only the business but your own future. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the employee culture, and I know that Steve is really tuned into this. So how did we come about picking this topic, Steve? Maybe we can tell everybody, and why is it so important in today's business world?
And by the way, Bill, you can find a lot of information on the internet, a lot of articles that have actually been written about this kind of phenomenon, and it's based on the generational shift that's taking place in the workforce. Actually, I believe it was either this year or the tail end of last year, or some time between this last 12 months, where the actual the dominant workforce actually changed from the baby boomers, which had been on top for decade or more, to now the millennials. Now millennials occupy the greatest chunk of employees in the U.S. workforce. And I think they're like 85 million strong, and the millennials, which obviously you'd expect, or not the millennials, but the baby boomers, because we're getting to that point in life where some are dying off and retiring, so they're getting out of the workforce. So, I think they're at like 78 or 79 million, so the millennials now are the top dogs. So the reason I think this conversation is important is because businesses today, which are still in majority, are run and operated by people in the baby boomer generation. They have that mindset, that thought process. They're now having to cater to an employee, a workforce, a potential employee that thinks differently about what they're looking for in a company they want to go to work for. And that's what culture is all about. It's what kind of an environment have we created in terms of who we think we are, how we do stuff. It's our company personality that sets the culture. And you guys know, you've worked for other people before. Some company cultures are with your liking, and other ones do things that you're just not that fond of. And so the difference today is that the millennials are a lot more vocal about what they're willing to work for and work within, much more so than people in our generation and the generation before us.
Well, I think you're right, Steve, because not only are they more vocal, but they have access to technology that, the three of us didn't have when we were entering the workforce. So their expectations are higher. They want more flexibility in what they do and the way they do, what they train to do or learn to do. So it's a huge.
Here's a question for both of you. And I'm not talking necessarily about you guys, because I think along with me, we were kind of in a transitional phase in our own, in our own work. But if you think about your parents, whatever kind of work they did, and that generation, do you know what the number one most important thing was for people in that generation in terms of who they went to work for, what they did for a living?
No, but I'm waiting with bated breath here, Steve.
Come on, Rick. Throw something out there.
My dad was a surgeon, so it was in a small little town. So it was, for him, I know now because I asked him, it was really just providing for his family. Whether he was there or not, he wanted to know that we were well provided for.
Okay, so you're very close. The answer to that was job security. People in that generation, and my father was a great example of it. He worked for the same company for 43 years. It was getting a job, getting into a company, working hard, getting paid, and staying there forever. That was what everybody pursued there. Now, consequently, when you look at today's generation, the millennial group, they have a different set of desires about what meaningful work is to them. And it probably shouldn't be any surprise that job security, while that's important, it's not on their list. It's not on the list of the top 5 things that are most important to them.
Well, interestingly enough, and I don't want to get too far afield here, but that's the interesting thing that we try to talk about today a lot, Steve, because really people think job security is going to work for somebody else. And interestingly enough, I've always felt that the most job security you're going to have is when you're working for yourself. You can't, you're not going to lay yourself off. You're not going to fire yourself. But that's an interesting aspect of what you were saying. But getting back to the real core of this, when employees come to work for an employer today, they may have different expectations of what they want in a job. And it's interesting because you're going to have to walk a fine line between what an employer can do for you, what you expect, and what the employer is bound by the law to pay attention to. And I find in my business that a lot of employees really don't know what not only what their rights and obligations are in today's culture, but they don't know what their responsibilities are in terms of how the law applies to them once they're on the job. So it's a fine line that these employers and employees walk today, much finer than I think in past years.
Well, Rick, you talked about it earlier. That's my office assistant that you're hearing back there, so don't worry about him. We might have to worry about him if he doesn't shut up. But I mean, you kind of hit it at the beginning when you talked about how technology has influenced every aspect of our lives. Okay, and I think like a lot of changes in society and the workforce and things like that, in which technology has opened the door to a lot of that stuff, it's also had consequences which nobody really saw early on. And one of the big ones is how the current generation, the workforce generation, the millennials, who many of them have grown up, with technology in their lives. So it's not like they had to learn late in life, that all of a sudden your phone, you can get on the internet, not just make calls. They've known this. So they've now figured out that you don't have to go and sit in an office all day in a building to do your job. There's plenty of technical advancements that allow you to be productive and get work done without being in one location all the time.
Yeah, hence why you see so many millennials working at Starbucks on their laptops.
Yeah. Hold on a minute, guys.
There you go.
Well, it's interesting, Rick. It's really interesting that we talk about this the company culture and what employees are going to go and specifically look for. We haven't touched upon maybe some of the specifics of what they would be seeking once they go out for a job. I mean, I know one of the things that I've experienced is a lot of employees are looking for a culture where perhaps they can sometimes work remotely, where they can not always have to spend all the time in the office. And I had an experience like that with a client, as a matter of fact, who felt that she had to do that because of a medical problem, and felt that she needed a medical accommodation, which the employer, if it was reasonable, would have been required to provide to her. However, when it came right down to it, in a deep discussion with her, you really found out that what she really wanted was to be able to work from home because, quote unquote, that's what a lot of the other employees are allowed to do. Well, you got to be careful when you get into that situation, crossing the line and maybe using a legal foundation or basis to make the culture what you want it to be. So my question to you guys is, how does an employer address the culture phenomenon? What do they tell an employee coming in the door that they can provide that maybe somebody else can't? Where does this all come to fruition for the employee?
Well, and that's a good question, Bill, because I know that as much as younger folks definitely want the flexibilities of being able to work from home, and sometimes it might be a medical condition, but a lot of times, and I know here in California, you've got young couples and they might have a family and both of them have to work. And so you have to balance a lot of family obligations, and both people can't be in an office working all day unless they're going to pay for childcare, which can be extraordinarily expensive. So sometimes they've got to do a little bit of juggling, and they're looking for the flexibility, the accommodation to be able to work and be able to manage the family at the same time. So when you have that situation and you're the employer, now you've got to ask yourself, how do I provide that flexibility accommodation, make it fair, but also ensure that people are as productive and as focused on the work that I'm paying for when they're not in the office and I can watch them, which that's basically what it boils down to.
Yeah, bingo, Steve. That's the connection I see. The flexibility versus the production. You could be flexible all you want, but if the production's not going to be there, then that business is going to suffer. So I mean, I think that's something that an employer needs to be able to prove, if you will, to the employee coming in the door. Hey, look, I can be flexible to a certain extent, but you have to understand that this is my business, this is how it runs, and nobody's going to be flexible at all because we won't have a job for anybody if there's not, if the productivity isn't there and the money's not coming in the door. But what about professional development, Steve? Does an employee, I think an employee in today's world really wants to know if they're coming into a job, they're going to be able to, I don't know, is train the right word, or be able to develop and maybe prosper in the position more than just the entry level position?
Yeah, I think most of them are looking for something that's going to engage them beyond the task work that they've been employed to do. So whether that's training just to kind of round out their experience, or if it's actually development programs that will eventually put them in position to rise up and take on more responsibility if that's what they choose to do, they just want to know that that's available. And I, in my own background, I came from organizations that tended to kind of waffle over time with this kind of stuff. At some point, they would open up the budget, the coffers, and they would start, offering people, you go take night school, and just send in the tuition, invoice, and we'll pay it for you. And they would do all these things as incentives so that people would feel good and feel energized and and think good of the place they were working. But most of the time, when business started getting a little rocky, belt tightening was taking place, the professional development was the first thing to get sliced. Pretty much any business, when things start getting tough, those kinds of nice to have programs are the ones that end up hitting the bricks almost immediately.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. gentlemen, if somebody is going to bring on an employee, and we've talked about the culture so far, we've talked about flexibility, professional development. Those are certainly, things that I think an employee should be able to expect to some extent to have provided to them when they come on the job. But, really, when it comes down to it, foundationally, this business owner is going to need to know that this business is already prosperous to some extent in order for him or her to be able to say, I can afford an employee, I can afford the flexibility, I can afford the personal development because I'm at a stage now where I can bring on somebody. My business has prospered that much. That's certainly something that the employer has an obligation to decide, right? I mean, that employer's got to know. He's just not going to advertise for an employee just for the sake of putting an ad in the paper.
No, but I mean, here's the deal. Right now, today, I think the average amount of time people stay in any given job, if I'm remembering some of the employment statistics that I've read recently, the average amount of time that people stay in any particular job is about 2.5 years. 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So that means if you've got, let's say, hey, Rick, let's say your video production company employs 20 people, okay, in all manner of different, job classifications. That means every 2.5 years, you're going to have at least one person, maybe more, that's going to decide to leave for some reason. You might even have to initiate that process too if they're not working out. But you're constantly going to be in a position of having to hire for openings, hire for maybe different positions you create because you see your business going in a different direction. But whatever the reason, you're going to be at that table talking to a candidate about whether they're going to be suitable for your company. So you don't really have to think about, do I need to bring on more people? It's what do I do with the people I've got?
Yeah, and how to keep them, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you something. The first thing I used to look at when I was a partner in my law firm and we brought on associates, the first thing I would look at on the resume is their job history. And I don't care if it was a young lawyer who had other jobs before he took the bar exam or a young lawyer who is coming from another firm, because not only can the culture affect someone's leaving, but I used to call it pay hike hopping. People will stay 1 or 2 years on a job and then leave just to get a raise for wherever else they're going. And I used to be turned off quite candidly by prospective employees who would come in and apply for a job and had a poor work history, 1 or 2 years. That always caused some concern for me. And there's really no telling from an interview or two whether or not that was the culture or whether or not they wanted they were just jumping around trying to get a higher rate of pay. Although it tended to happen more in the younger employees who were who wanted to try to get up the pay scale a little bit quicker.
Well, I have currently, and I have had in the past, clients with an employee base who have gone through periods of high turnover. And many of the times, if they're not doing it, what I suggest almost immediately is they adopt an exit interview process. Usually the owner of the company is not the person to be conducting this, but somebody with some level of authority in the company, or maybe even somebody outside, needs to get a hold of that employee after they've officially left and have an exit interview with them. Just a candid discussion. Hey, tell us what didn't work. Tell us what you thought you were walking into when you took the job, and what it ended up being like. What would you recommend we do differently, to correct whatever it is you decided you left over. And what you find out if you do this enough is that people will tell you that they're leaving for more money, a better opportunity. Okay, 9 times out of 10, that's not the case. They're leaving to get away from something. They're running to something, or running from something rather than running to something. And that goes back to the work environment that you have going on around you, that at some point people just say, hey, enough, I got to get out of here.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Steve, but the new employer, unfortunately, is not going to be privy to that conversation. He's not going to know, he or she is not going to know why this guy eventually left, other than being able to ask, hey, right, why did you leave your prior job?
Right.
So I think an employer needs to be flexible to the extent that he or she can. They need to provide some personal development. And the employee, by the same token, needs to have an understanding of what it is they're getting into what do they really want? Because if they accept a job that maybe doesn't provide these opportunities, the flexibility, the development, then they have to take the responsibility for that. It's a real interesting situation. Why do you think why do you think, Steve, I think we touched upon at the beginning of the show, Steve and Rick, why do you think it's more prevalent today that employees are more concerned about the culture in the workplace today than they were years ago?
Well, I got a thought on it, but Rick, why don't you jump in if you've got an opinion on this?
Yeah, I do, and it kind of leans towards technology and the resulting culture because of technology. The millennials, and I can speak from personal experience, like with my daughters, right? They're college students, and I kind of see this with my son, who's in second grade, is that whenever they need something, they're asked for something, they tend to want it right away and want the answer right away. They want to know, because we're all connected, right? And so he'll ask me a question and I don't know it. What's his response to me? Why don't you just Google it, Dad? We can find out right away, right? And it's that instant gratification of knowing that we're going to take care of them because we have the technology here to do that. To me, that's totally different than what it was before. If I ever asked my mom and dad a question like that, we didn't have Google back then. We had a whole rack of encyclopedias, on the
World
book. Yeah, exactly. So,
see, I've got a little different slant on this thing. I think as the millennial generation grew up through their formative years and eventually, became of age to really start taking in things, what they were seeing is their parents, having worked at companies for long periods of time, maybe it wasn't back then, it wasn't unusual for somebody to work for maybe one or two companies their entire career instead of 8 or 10 now. But what they saw was mom and dad working for someone, maybe not thoroughly enjoying what they did, but there's that security thing. They've got to have that job. They've got to put food on the table, all that kind of good stuff. And finally, when mom and dad, turned 50 or 52 or 55, all of a sudden the company found a reason to get rid of them. And so they're looking at this and they're saying, that's not what I want. I want to work for a company that has my values. I want to do work that's meaningful. It means something to me, and it's contributory to something of purpose. I don't want to just park myself at some organization for 15 or 20 years because there's a paycheck attached to it. And they've kind of seen evidence of that employment approach, and the end result hasn't been good. And so I think they've looked at it differently and said, I'm looking for something different. I don't want that.
So you're saying that the millennials are more looking for something that's that provides more social responsibility in what they're tied to, right?
Yeah, I think when they, look, let's face it, we all are in situations where sometimes a good job that may not be your perfect job is kind of presented in front of you, and if you need to work, you jump on it, okay? Which I think is the reason why people tend to move around a lot, because when that perfect socially responsible company comes along and they offer you something, you're going to be tempted to move in that direction. But I agree with you, Rick. I think they want to know that who they're working for has the kind of values that they can say, it's almost like branding. It's you wear your favorite T-shirt because it's got the name of some organization or something on it that you identify with. They look at their companies the same way. They want to know that company is doing things for the community, for the environment, for whatever other cause that they've wrapped themselves around, that they can say, yeah, I work for these folks and I like what they do when they're not selling the goods and services we're there to sell.
Yeah.
So it becomes even more evident that this type of company branding is really what attracts these young people and makes them want to stay around longer. Because if their values connect with this company's values, then it's more attractive for them.
Sure.
Well, here's my final thought on all this as we get near to ending the show, and that is, since we want our listeners and our viewers to be prosperous and protected business owners, young entrepreneurs, old entrepreneurs, middle of the road entrepreneurs, I think what our listeners and viewers need to do is to focus on interviewing people that focus on what their values are, the employer's values, the owner's values, and the expectations of that employee, and whether or not that employee is going to fit into that value category, if you will, of the business owner. Because only in that way are you going to be able to draw people in who are going to be satisfied with their job and also fulfill the requirements of the employer. And I still think, whether you're talking about millennials or whether you're talking about baby boomers, that to me is the core of hiring an employee. You've got to be able to know that they're gonna buy into what you're selling. And yeah, you have no guarantees. You can only ask questions. But if you prepare a good, solid interview, and that could be the topic of a whole nother show, then I think you're well on your way to fulfilling your responsibility to the employee and making a happy employee simultaneously. And yes, you be flexible, you have professional development, and you help the community as much as you can, but within the confines of what your business can afford.
Right, and that's really the bottom line, because whatever you establish for new emerging employees in your business, you've got to go back and look at the legacy group that's already sitting there, because they're going to want similar accommodations. And if you're going to keep an open and fair workforce and have everybody feel like, the people they're working for are just and stuff like that, you're almost going to have to say, okay, gee, we have these 50 people now working for us. The new batch coming in is expecting X, Y, Z. How are we going to give the other 50 the same opportunity without just blowing the budget?
Right. Well, this is interesting. It's been a great show. It's kind of has been more of a philosophical show today in some respects than we normally do. But I think it's important, because if you're looking for a job, or if you're an employer who's looking for somebody to bring into your company that you can rely upon, these are topics that sometimes you brush under the carpet and you don't face head up. And I think you need to do that. You need to be honest with yourself and honest with the employee. And employees out there, or prospective employees, you need to be honest in the interview process with what you want and expect from that employer when you're in that interview. So, well, gentlemen, I appreciate it as always. Another interesting, and I like to use the word valid. It's a very valid show because it reflects today's culture. Since our marketing guys really put this show together and did the most to contribute to it, I think, let's have everybody out there or find out where they can get a hold of Mr. Smith and Mr. Moscoso. Rick, why don't we start with you and tell everybody where they can get a hold of you, and then we'll go over to Rick. Over to Steve.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. You can reach out to me via my office number at 949-667-1182, or via email at rickmoscoso@gmail.com. And all of our contact information will be below this video. So let me know if you need any help in regards to video marketing or any type of production work where I can help you.
Great. And Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Bill and Rick. For anybody that's running a business now and they're facing these kinds of issues, their hiring practices aren't really where they should be. They're having a lot of turnover. Maybe they're just struggling to run the business efficiently and profitably. That's an area we can have a discussion over. So I would just suggest go to my website. It's www.growthsourcecoaching.com. All of my contact information is on there. Phone number's right on the first page. You can pick up whatever you like. You can email me. You can even ask a question on my business advice section there, and I'll get back to you, and I'll just provide you my observations on what you ought to do, and there's no cost or obligation for doing that. So there's a lot of different ways to connect with me. You choose the one that fits your situation that you're comfortable with.
And for me, anybody who wants to know the legal ramifications or responsibilities, duties, however you want to term them, as an employee or as an employer, and how that interaction is supposed to take place, within the bounds and confines of the law, you can get a hold of me at wfblegalconsulting.com, and all my information is there as well. Gentlemen, thanks again. We'll look forward to seeing you next week for another show, another edition of the Bottle Business Sense Show. So until then, everybody, take care and have a prosperous week.
Take care, guys. Talk to you later.
See you next week.